Welcome to Interview Connections. We're the first ever podcast booking agency. I'm Jessica Rhodes, the founder. And 12 years ago in 2013, I started booking my dad as a guest on podcasts because I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And fast forward to today, we're a multi-seven-figure agency. We've worked with over 800 clients. We've booked more than 30,000 podcast interviews. And this podcast is all of our top lessons from the last 12 years, booking entrepreneurs on podcasts, scaling our company to be multi-seven figures a year, distilled down into bite-sized topics and episodes to help you learn from us. I co-host this show with Interview Connections co-owner and CEO, Margie. And without further ado, let's dive into today's episode.
In today's episode, we're going to talk about metrics. This is a question we get so often, and especially people who are business owners who are maybe newer to podcast guesting, they're very focused on the metrics and what numbers should I be looking at to understand if a show and a host are going to be worth my time, which you know that if you've listened to us a bit, we don't love that way of thinking, that transactional way of thinking of, is this going to be worth my time? But we can totally understand as an entrepreneur, you're looking for shows that are aligned with the level that your brand and business are at. And a lot of people get overwhelmed. They don't know where to look. They're looking at the wrong things. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of numbers out there that if you read the fine print are actually estimates that aren't real numbers. And so we don't want you to make the mistake of judging a show based on data points that aren't actually what you should be focusing on. The goal of this episode is that you are crystal clear on what you're focusing on and what you're not focusing on so that you don't get bogged down and you're successfully getting on the right shows.
All right, so let's dive into it. So number one, social media of the host. This is one of those data points and metrics that a lot of podcast guests will look at to try to determine how big is this show, how good is this show, how big is their audience. Now, let's talk about what can we learn from looking at the host's social media. So number one, you can just get a sense of their brand alignment, anywhere from the actual visuals, their photos, their graphics, their colors, what they're doing videos about, how they're presenting themselves. You can get a sense of if there's alignment and, kind of get that instinct there. You can also look at, just learn who they are, right? Who is the host? What is their business? You can very quickly look at someone's LinkedIn and see what their business is. What are they talking about? How long have they been in business? If you scroll down and look at their kind of work history, what are they posting about? What are they talking about? What are they doing videos about? Is there kind of a personal vibe of their profile? Is it all business, no play, all play, no business? So you can just kind of start to get to know a podcast host by looking at their social media. You can also, of course, see some follower counts. You can see Instagram follower counts. You can look at how many views or likes or comments they have on their posts. On LinkedIn, you can get in there and see, followers, number of connections. I think you can see up to 500 and then just 500 plus connections. Now, I say these numbers because you want to take them all with a grain of salt, right? There's no, if they have this many followers on Instagram or above, it's a green light. If they have less than that, it's a red light. There's really no line in the sand. It's about looking at the whole picture holistically to decide, is this a host that would be a good connection for me? Is this a host that I think I would get along with? Would there be a good conversation if this host and I got together for a podcast interview? I do want to point out that many people have grown their following on Instagram by buying their followers, and that doesn't mean because they have a big follower, they have a big audience of real people. And then there's also people that have a smaller following on social media, but it's 100% organic, really engaged people. So that's what you can look at on social media. Again, you want to do it holistically, not putting a ton of weight on any one of those factors.
Yeah, and that's going to be the theme of this episode. We're going to explain these metrics, but the big thing is you need to have a clear strategy so you don't get distracted, because it's one thing to say, this is my strategy and I want to find numbers and metrics and hosts that align with it. That's fine. But what we see a lot is people getting distracted. They're overwhelmed. They're like, I don't know what to look for. I don't know if a show's a good fit. And then they're looking at all these different data points and judging people like, well, they don't have a lot of social media followers, so maybe I shouldn't. But then this, so maybe I should. So focus, stay calm, come back to what are your goals. I don't care about a host's social media. I care if they're posting things that are depraved, but I don't look at their social media. First of all, I follow them to connect with them, but I don't really pay attention to their number of followers. If a host has a really high number of followers, I'm just like, oh, that's kind of fun. But that's not what I'm looking for, because I know that there are people with really successful businesses doing really big revenue numbers with a lot of experience who don't care about Instagram, who just aren't focused on social media growth because that's not where their clients are coming from. And so I'm excited to talk to hosts who are successful entrepreneurs, and how committed they are to their social media marketing strategy doesn't matter to me, because that has nothing to do with my goals for the networking and for getting in front of their audience. Interview Connections, we grew to 7 figures with a tiny social media following, like less than 1,000 followers on Instagram. We had about less than 2,000 people on our email list, and we were doing 7 figures in annual revenue. These are vanity metrics. So of course, there are people who are monetizing a big social media following, and that's amazing. There's a lot of people with a big following who aren't making a lot of money in their business, and there's a lot of really successful entrepreneurs who don't have a big following and aren't super focused on social media. So what are your goals? If your goals are to have high quality conversations with successful entrepreneurs, then don't get distracted by how into Instagram they are, because that's probably not important for your goal.
Yeah. All right. Number 2, this is a metric that I love that most people don't even know about. They don't know what it is. They're not looking at it. They don't put any weight on it. And let me tell you, this is such a hidden gem. The domain authority of a podcast host's website. So if you just Google domain authority checker, there's a lot of different tools out there, moz.com. Now I'm trying to say the names and I don't remember. Just Google it. I have no affiliation with the domain checker or businesses, but they're out there. And the essentially what this is a data point that shows you how much authority that website has. And the reason that this is important and valuable for you to know is that as a podcast guest, when you're a guest on somebody's show, they're going to put a backlink to your website in the episode description of the show, meaning you're going to get a link on their website. They're going to put a link to your website on their website. And when they have a really high domain authority, Google puts a lot more weight on that. Google says, like, damn, like this guy linked to this person's website, like that. Okay. Because if he's talking about it or if she's talking about it, like that's kind of how it works in a nutshell. So sure. Going on podcasts with really strong domain authorities is really good for your search engine optimization. You will be higher up in the Google search results when people are looking for you and what you do when you have a lot of backlinks on really strong websites. And so, for example, if there's a really established business owner, they've been in business for 20 years, they have a website with a very high domain authority because they've been in business a long time, but they're just getting into Instagram and social media now. To our last point, they might have a really small following on social media, but they're an actual really legit successful business owner with a high domain authority. I'll choose that podcast over a brand new business owner with a 10,000 Instagram followers because they figured out the algorithm any day. So domain authority of a host website, a super good metric to look at if one of your goals is to increase your SEO.
And we have had clients who truly that was the only reason they were getting booked on podcasts. They did not care about, they still did a great job on their interviews, but that was what they cared about. And they were like, wow, this is a really cheap way to get really good backlinks. And we were like, okay, sounds great. So this is like its own entire strategy and an additional reason why podcast guesting is incredibly valuable in addition to all the other ways that you can monetize it in your business. Number 3, Number of listeners. So as of the recording of this podcast, the data for how many listeners the show has is only available to the host of the show. So anyone who's telling you that they know that data for, a lot of shows, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page where they say that and find the little asterisk, it says, these are estimates. These are our best guess based on whatever algorithm. So be careful of people saying they know the number of listeners of a show unless they have actually asked the host. This data is not public. It kind of wouldn't matter if it was, though, because the number of listeners, people get really, really focused on this. And again, this is where it's really important to come back to your goals. Why are you doing this? Do you want to go podcast viral and just have as many people hear you as possible? Then maybe big shows would be a good fit, and you're probably not a good fit to work with us because we're working with entrepreneurs who want to get clients. They're in it for the fortune, not the fame. And so Jess and I have both been on top 100 Apple Podcasts with 100,000 downloads per month. And we were both on this show separately. I've been on it multiple times. And as far as I know, I don't think we got any clients for Interview Connections from the show. It's an incredible show. It's really good, but the listeners weren't our target audience. And I have gotten clients from shows that probably had 100 to 300 downloads that were more targeted on online business owners, who's our ideal client, and got clients. I've had hosts sign up who interviewed me who had maybe 100 downloads on their podcast, who signed up with Interview Connections before our interview even went live. So that's what we're focused on, is the ROI in the business of this networking strategy. So number of listeners, there might be some people who are really going for volume, and that's a totally different game, and that's not what we focus on and talk about. But if you're like most online entrepreneurs who have a high ticket service, then you are not going for volume. You are going for the right people hearing you who are going to take action and work with you.
Yeah. Number 4, this is a big one that people look at, is ratings, reviews on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or any of the podcast directories and players where people are listening to podcasts. So I'm going to read some information. I believe this is from Riverside's website, but the similar data is available on many different sites. As of December 2024, 37% of podcast listeners are on Spotify. 33% are on Apple Podcasts. Those are the 2 top performers where people listen to audio-only podcasts. Now, if we're going to include video podcast in this, then YouTube has 31% of listeners, followed by Spotify, 21%, and Apple, 12%. So what does this mean to you? What can you take from this information? What you can take from this is the fact that a podcast host's audience is listening on many different platforms. And so if you look at their Apple Podcast profile, for lack of a better word, and you say, well, they only have 5 reviews there or 10 ratings, that could only be 30% of their audience. Another 30% on Spotify, maybe another 10% on YouTube, or, another 20% is on their website. They're all over the place. And so if you're looking at ratings and reviews only on one platform, that's only a small percentage of their audience. And the other thing about Apple Podcasts is that when you leave a review or a rating on Apple Podcasts, that review is only going to show up in your country's store. So there's a United States of America Apple Podcast store. There's a Canadian Apple Podcast store. And there's a way to toggle to the different countries. So podcast audiences are global. Most podcasts have listeners in many different countries around the world. And so if they have listeners in many different countries that are leaving reviews in all their own Apple stores, those reviews are all dispersed. So again, if you're listening to this and your mind starts spinning, the point is stay calm. Don't worry about this data. Don't worry about this metric. I am an avid listener of many podcasts that I have never left a review for. I don't leave ratings. Like, I listen every single week, But I'm not necessarily leaving ratings and reviews unless the host like knows me personally. He's like, hey, can you leave me a review? I'm like, of course, because I like you and you just asked me. But I don't usually leave reviews. It's not, in my opinion, the most accurate representation of how engaged an audience is. So don't worry too much about it.
Agree. I never leave reviews.
Who has the time, honestly?
I'm not going to do that unless someone asks me one-on-one. But if you just ask me in the podcast and you're like, everybody, can you do this? I'm like, no.
And the big shows, like the top tier shows with millions of listeners, people who leave reviews are the ones that either hate it and want the host to know how much they hate them, or of course there's people that'll just like tap that 5-star review. But yeah, busy, successful people that are like moving and grooving and making moves, they're not leaving reviews.
Also, like looking at, is there a correlation with reviews and audience size? Sure. Like there's most of the people listening aren't leaving reviews, but like if a show has hundreds of thousands of reviews, of course it has more listeners than a show that has 50 reviews. But again, what's the goal? Why do you care about it having more listeners? And are you really prepared to monetize a big, giant, unfocused audience? Or is your strategy to get clients in your online service-based business, which is probably more likely with a more targeted audience? All right, number 5, podcast directories and softwares. So we use a lot of these for show research. There's ListenNotes, there's all kinds, Rephonic. They have their own ranking system. So you'll see a lot of people post like, my show's in the top 0.5% on ListenNotes, which is great. Celebrate those wins. What that actually means when you look into it, not a lot. The number of downloads for a show that's like the 1% or the top 10% is not necessarily a ton of downloads. And also it's their ranking system where if you read the fine print on their website about how they come up with the number, essentially they make it up. But it's an estimate based on their algorithm looking at listenership in different places and looking at some different factors. But it's not really hard data. And again, how many listeners a show has is probably not your biggest focus if you are a service-based entrepreneur looking to monetize podcast guesting in your business and get more clients.
Yeah. I just cannot emphasize enough how much those rankings are invented by the directories that create them. I just think that's cannot be said enough. All right. Number 6, reality check. Do you have a clear strategy? So if you are, we just took you through a lot of different data points and metrics and things that you can look at online about a podcast to decide, is it big enough? Is it good enough? Is it in alignment enough? And if you get overly fixated on one or all of these metrics and then you start getting overwhelmed, you may not have a clear enough strategy on how you can monetize your podcast appearances. Because if you know who your audience is, you know who your ideal buyer is, and you know that when you speak to your ideal buyer, when you speak in front of the right audience, that people will want to work with you, then you can just calm down. Don't worry about all these different metrics and data points because it will work. If you are not clear on your audience, you're not clear on your strategy, you're not clear how you're going to convert, you'll likely go into panic mode and just say, it's a numbers game. It's a numbers game. My strategy's a mess, but if I get in front of enough people, I'll get enough sales. Fix your strategy. Get clear on your strategy because we see all the time clients with a really sound strategy with a very clear focus, a crystal clear target audience. They go on mid-tier podcasts with 200 listeners all day long and are making millions of dollars in sales because there's a clear strategy and a clear focus. While some people who have no strategy are just panic trying to get on the biggest shows because they just assume it's a numbers game. Podcast guesting isn't just a numbers game. It's a quality game and it's a relationship game.
Yes. And if you're just like in this mentality of more is more, is it? For some people, if you have a direct to consumer low ticket product that a lot of people would want to buy, then advertising on a big podcast might have an ROI for you. But if you sell a high ticket service to a specific type of person, especially if you're B2B, are the masses really going to help you? Is that really where you want to be? Going viral, having just like high numbers means nothing. I got down a TikTok rabbit hole where I was growing my TikTok really fast. I think I got to like 50 something thousand. And then I was like, I don't want to be in this app anymore. But I had a few things go viral. I had one thing get like 1.9 million views. And it didn't do anything. Like I had an offer at the time, like an affiliate offer that people did click and go to, but it really is. I think sometimes it's helpful to go viral or to like be on a really big show once, just so you know that it's not what you think it is. Like it's not like your ideal client comes flooding in for most people. It depends on your business. But for someone like me who owns Interview Connections, for someone like you, if you're a service-based entrepreneur, it's unlikely that getting in front of hundreds of thousands or millions of people is actually the strategy for you. And we've had multiple clients that we booked on really big shows. They were really excited about it. And it was crickets. They were either flooded with people who were the wrong client, and then someone had to do the admin work of going through and politely rejecting all these people, or it was just crickets because they weren't the right people. And these smaller targeted audiences of your ideal client are the ones that are actually converting. So really thinking about, what are you in it for? Do you have a clear strategy, a clear funnel that converts? If you know that your ideal buyer, when they hear you speak, they buy, then going on a podcast with 100 listeners who are all your ideal client is going to have an ROI in your business. So shift from thinking about this, like Jess said, as a volume strategy. This is a network strategy. And there are people, celebrities go on podcasts and it's a volume strategy. What's his name?
Ed Sheeran, of course.
Ed Sheeran, who was the star of our marketing email a month or two ago, new album out. So he's going on big podcasts. He's famous, so he can get on big podcasts really easily. And he has a low ticket direct to consumer thing because it's easy. Listen to this album, download this album. Okay, great. He's not saying, I have this $20,000 a year coaching program. Do you want to work with me to improve your business or improve your life? That would be a different situation, right? That's a very different, more targeted offer. So this is a networking strategy. When you think about it as a relationship building networking strategy, you are building your audience not with volume, but with the right people. And that is where the magic is.
Yeah, I honestly just noticed with, especially like business podcasts, the bigger the show, like the bigger the following, the business podcast hosts with, millions of followers, hundreds upon thousands of followers, I noticed that their content is much more focused on a lower end clientele, people that are just getting started, people that are just trying to get off the ground. So if you have an offer for, like Margie said, you've got a $20,000 author, $100,000, contract service in your agency, like your ideal clients, because many of our clients, their target audience are, high net worth people, millionaires, 6, 7, 8-figure entrepreneurs. Then going on a show where that audience is mostly people who are just trying to get started, just trying to close their first sale, just trying to get off the ground, because that is the mass. The masses are just trying to get started. You need to just zoom in on the smaller, more targeted shows that actually have the people that are making the amount of money to where they are going to invest in your high ticket offering, your investing type of service. So be focused, be targeted. And if you are ready to take action and start getting on the right targeted shows, honestly, if you want us to take this off your plate, we do all the research and vetting for our clients. You don't have to analyze the shows. We can do it for you. Just go to interviewconnections.com and you can book a consultation call.